So I got to just ask a question. How many of you were at this session last year? Raise your hand. I'm sorry. This is going to be really fun. We're going to go to some places that I think you're going to be surprised by. Last year, it ended up a little off the hook in a good way, and we expect this year to be even better. I want to introduce myself. I'm Steven Rosenbaum. I run the SustainableMedia.Center in New York. And I should maybe just tell you 3 sentences about what we do. The Sustainable Media Center was created a year ago after we took a hard look at the state of media, particularly as it impacts young people, and came to the kind of non-negotiable conclusion that the state of media was unsustainable in its current form. We're now 100 extraordinary people working on this problem, some of whom you know and one of whom is on the stage with us. And one of the things that happened, and you'll see in a minute why, is we found this word media, you couldn't even get people to agree what media was. Like, you use the word, oh, well, you mean the media. The media is bad. The media does this. Which media? Social media, news media, gaming media? So Evan is our secret sauce weapon in this fight to figure out what this thing is that infiltrates all of our lives. That being said, when we talked about coming to South by, I said to Evan, what should we call the panel? And he said, we should call the panel, What the Fuck Happened? And I said, yeah, they're not going to let us say that. And more importantly, can't you say that every year about the media? It's all last year, the year, and he's like, no. He's like, 22 was a special kind of fucked upness. So he's going to make that argument for the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to have some time for Q&A. I'll give you a clue about Evan. If you Google him, you will find, as I count, there are about 5 different versions of him. And it's, we've all Googled and found people with our name that have, one of them's a plumber, and you're like, am I a plumber? So if you Google Evan Shapiro, he's a television producer, he's a film producer, he's a network executive, he's a comedy wrangler, he's a cartographer, which, by the way, is a fancy word for map maker. He's also a numbers guy. And if you drill down to some of the things he says today, because he'll speak really fast, and he'll blow by some numbers and he'll be like, wait, I have to write that down. But if you check the numbers, they hold up, which I find puzzling because generally the people I know in the creative industries can't work a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet guys can't, run a comedy show. Having said that, I hope that this next hour will be fun, and I would encourage you, think of yourself like a late night audience at a comedy club that's had a little too much to drink. Don't let his pontification go unquestioned. Feel free to ask, like, wait a minute, there's a mic there, we'll get to it about 20 minutes, 25 minutes into the panel. But to begin with, I just want to start by introducing Evan Shapiro and the What the Fuck Happened, the year of 2022. Evan.
Hi, nice to meet you. I don't know what to do with that introduction. You Google my name and sometimes you get Shapiro. Shapiro. I mean, that's a joke for people who know me, which clearly not many people do. I don't know where you want me to start.
Let's start with this thing.
Okay.
So, when you started sharing this out, which is now it's a little over 2 years old.
It's about 3 years old now.
There were a whole bunch of people that got super angry at the size of Apple. Wait, that makes no sense. How is that a media company?
There were people who got angry that I put Microsoft and Apple and Meta and Google on a map with Disney and Netflix and now Disco Brothers or Warner Brothers. My point was, I don't understand why you're angry. Yes, they're much bigger, but they do the same things. And in many cases, the companies like Disney and Netflix and Warner Brothers and Paramount have to go through Apple and Google and Amazon just to get to the consumers. So not only do they belong on the same map in a comparison study, the bigger players are actually controlling the tenor of the conversation in a way that the little players are never going to be able to. So the proximity of these huge stars to each other is important, because in order to understand what is happening in media, you have to understand the power dynamics between these trillion-dollar Death Stars with unlimited resources and these old guard media players who are trying to redesign the bathroom in a house that's burning down. You know, it's great, but at the end, all you have is a nice toilet.
Because of the porcelain.
Yeah, right, exactly.
All right, so here's the outline. We're gonna go in kind of order. What the fuck happened? What the fuck is happening now? What are the 4 big drivers of change in the ecosystem? And then we'll dig into some specifics. But let's start with what the fuck happened.
So what the fuck happened? What in the last couple of years, the underpinnings of the media economy have come undone. They've been pulled out. And what's happened is, in replacement of that, you've got this free-form system of asymmetrical consumption and unlimited supply of content on many different devices all the time, not all tethered to fundamental economically sound business principles. So as this media system expands and contracts, there used to be the cable bundle and the triple play. Now we are without those things, and the entire system becomes unmoored. Everybody's trying to move into television and audio and gaming and social media simultaneously, and they're trying to race for the same dollars and eyeballs. But because we have no centralized government like we did when we turned on 3 television channels, and that was all that was on, no one can figure out their own business model anymore. So we are reassembling this ecosystem in real time. But because none of even the big players, not even Apple and Amazon, know exactly where it's going, they're not really assembling for something. They're just throwing business models at platforms. They're hoping that when they add advertising to CTV, it's going to replace the old model. They're hoping that when they add subscription to premium ad-free streaming, that it's going to replace the old cable system, and it's not going to do that. So we are losing what we knew, and we're trying to build for something new, but nobody has the blueprints.
So I want to just ask.
And that's what happened in 2022. Everybody chased Netflix down the ad-free streaming rabbit hole, and then they got there to the bottom of the hole, and there was nothing there. And now everybody's trying to throw ads on top of that system, and they're wondering why that's not going to replace the money that they've already lost from the old cable TV bundle. You can't redesign what doesn't work. You have to build something new. And even the Apples and the Amazons don't necessarily want to do that because they've had so much invested in what they've already built. So I think, go ahead.
I want to just understand the underlying math here, because you and I have talked about this map a lot, but some of these people in the audience need something to build on. So when you, for example, put Apple on that screen, or NVIDIA, or Alphabet, what numbers are you using to make that?
So the x-axis on this map is market valuation. It's just math. There's no opinion to it. The y-axis is context. What's happening in the ecosystem right now? It has my opinion in it. It also has kind of the last quarter's earnings reports influencing it. And so the scale is inarguable. It's just a real-time measurement of the value of the company. But where social media is, 2-3 years ago, they were in the power position in the upper right-hand corner. Now, for the most part, except for the last month in Meta's stock price, they're circling the drain. And there's a number of different reasons for that. Actually, I think let's jump into the 4 drivers, because it explains the map incredibly well. So the context of this map is driven by 4 major drivers of change for the next decade. Okay? So I redo this map by hand in PowerPoint once a month. And I redid it this week. And so I go in and I change all the metrics, including the subscriber numbers and the number of phones, and then the map itself is dictated by market capitalization. But then when you look at these numbers every couple of weeks, every single one of them, these trends emerge. And these 4 major drivers are now pushing this ecosystem in different directions. The first and foremost is the trillion-dollar Death Stars. the trillion-dollar Death Stars. So these now $4 trillion companies, used to be 5 with Meta. I think NVIDIA will be a trillion-dollar Death Star at some point in the nearish future. But these $4 trillion Death Stars, because they control 100% of the smartphones on Earth, Apple and Alphabet, because they control a lot of the operating systems inside televisions, Amazon and Alphabet, because they control so much of the technology that powers this ecosystem, AWS, they are going to have disproportionate power here. And they're going to invest in ecosystems like television and audio and gaming at a loss because they have unlimited resources to do so. They will infiltrate the areas of business of all the smaller planets on here so that they can have influence in it. And on top of that, other companies like Warner Brothers Discovery, Fox, and Disney are going to merge in response to the power and influence that these companies have. So the trillion-dollar Death Stars have this disproportionate gravitational pull in this ecosystem. Go ahead.
When you say unlimited money, so when so I just want to be clear. Do you think that at Apple they sit in the conference room and say we could spend $100 million or $1 billion or $5 billion on content, and Tim says whatever? No, I mean,
no,
have
I think
budgets.
though they invest in Apple Music without necessarily having to show a profit in Apple Music, and they can compete with Spotify and will continue. The halftime show with Rihanna, sponsored by Apple on a big iPhone, dancing around on a big iPhone, is not an accident. They're coming for Spotify's crown in audio. By the way, they're also coming for gaming. Arcade is not necessarily a profitable business, but the Apple services is really the future of that enterprise, and so they will invest in services. They will, in the case of the App Store. So who here has an Apple iPhone? Who here has an Android? Who has something else? There are 2 companies that control 100% of all the app purchases on the face of the earth, right? And a couple of years ago, Tim Apple was told by his team that they were going to lose the epic lawsuit eventually, and people were going to be able to circumnavigate the App Store to collect fees for their apps. And at that point, Apple decided to basically get into the advertising business by squeezing the social media companies out of their ability to track. I heard on this stage yesterday, someone said, Tim Cook cares about your privacy. No, that's not true. He cares about Mark Zuckerberg's business, and he decided to put him out of it so that he could steal his advertising money. That's a great example.
By the way, this is all off the record.
But that's, I mean,
kidding,
the
of course.
change in the App Store was because they knew they were going to have trouble charging that tax that they have been unlimited in up until this point, and they needed to get into the ad business. This is the year Apple gets into the ad business. So there's just a couple of examples. The fastest growing operating system on connected televisions on the face of the earth is Google TV. Same company that controls 70% of your phones. So the pull and push of those companies are going to have on this ecosystem is going to be incredibly influential for at least the next 10 years. And NVIDIA, I do think, is one of those companies that could emerge as a competitor in this trillion-dollar ecosystem. The second major driver is the balance between single unit sales, single unit sales, and recurring revenue bundles, or as Scott Galloway calls, rundles. Advertising and subscription. Not a battle between them, but a balance between them. Companies that balance these things well will succeed. Companies that have diverse revenue streams and don't rely on one product or one service for their entire business, those are the companies that have a chance of getting through this reshaping that we're going through. And we are redesigning this ecosystem. And it will favor the companies who have bundles of services that keep customers around. Companies that do not balance these things well. Meta, a 98% advertising business. That's why they're worth a lot less than they were about a year ago. Netflix, a one revenue business until the fourth quarter of this year, and still a one revenue business, right? They did not expect to be taking ads so soon. The companies that Alphabet is in the same business ostensibly as Meta is, but because they have more revenue inputs, because they have the cloud business, because they have a subscription business, because they have many different elements to their P&L, they have an opportunity to see the other side of what's being reshaped here. So the balance of your revenue levers will dictate success in this ecosystem. And then, go ahead.
So of all the companies you just named, if you had to pick one that is in the most trouble, like what's the one where like they're like, wow, we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel?
I don't understand how any of the social media companies whose entire revenue stream is predicated on advertising in a model that is not necessarily designed for the next turn. I don't see how they all come out of it entirely whole.
And even if Section 230 doesn't come unglued on them, which
I don't think that's necessarily, yeah, I mean, that's a major problem for them, but I don't see how Twitter, Snap, and Pinterest get through. Meta's too big to fail to a certain extent, but really, I don't know how Spotify survives as a standalone company a year from now. I have trouble seeing how Roku, who's entirely tied to one business model, can get through the other side of what's coming. Those are the companies.
But Twitter is a rocket ship.
Yeah, Twitter, invest heavily if you can, because you're just giving it to Elon at that point. The balance of revenues, the third and fourth drivers of change in this ecosystem are really tied together, and they are the generational shift from a world dominated by boomers and Gen Xers to a world dominated by millennials, Gen Zers, and increasingly Gen A. And when you look at this ecosystem, you have to think about the companies who can cater to those three generations well, as opposed to the ones who are tethered to the last two generations. You have to think about the management shifts. Right now, about 45 to 50% of the workforce of this map is Generation Y and Generation Z, millennials and Generation Z. By the end of this decade, it'll be closer to 80%. And Generation A will be starting to come into the workforce. So you have to think about them not just as consumers. And as consumers, Generation A and Generation Y are responsible for TikTok. They're responsible for Roblox. They're responsible for Fortnite. They're responsible for enormous consumption shifts on here. But when these three generations are also making decisions as to what to greenlight and what to make and where to invest, they're going to make decisions very differently than the generations that came before them. Generation Z is the most connected, most depressed, most suicidal, most diverse generation to ever walk the face of the earth. They're not going to make the same decisions as millennials or Gen Xers did.
But what if the federal government shuts TikTok down?
I think TikTok implodes by under its own weight because of regulatory things, but also because their owners don't like things that don't make money and don't work all the time. So I think, does anybody here know how much money TikTok spends in advertising? Spends in marketing, not takes in advertising, right? They spent $19 billion in 2021 marketing. Their audience is not an accident. They lost $7 billion last year. So their owners are going to come looking for something at some point. So, but this generational shift of consumption, the reason why social media will change to what it isn't now and what it will be, and it will look a lot more like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite, is because of these generations. The way that the economics of all these platforms shift are because these generations are not going to be chill about giving all their privacy and all their content away for free, the way that we have been the last couple of years. I
just want to point out the younger generation in the back of the room, that made the younger generation very sad.
Just going out to post a TikTok right now. One of these core tenets of Web3 that we keep hearing that are coming is about community. But it's also about the fair exchange of value. And us being the product of Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, we're going to see a shift there to what's being more approximated in these smaller metaverses that are emerging. And then when you look back at this slide, and you look at how quickly the generational shifts are occurring in the workplace and in consumerism, and then you remember the last 3 years of lockdown, of artificial compression of time and space, of the acceleration of our adoption of different tech platforms, and you think about the shifting workforce and the accelerated rate of adoption over the last 3 years. So many more subscribers coming into streaming than anybody ever thought. So much more social media being used. So many more connected televisions being bought. The rate of change because of these two things, this generational shift and this unnatural lockdown in space and time, they've accelerated the rate of change in this ecosystem by as much as a decade. The cultures and the business models of these companies have been, some by 5 years, some by 10 years. There's no way Netflix thought they'd be taking ads right now. There's no way that Facebook thought they would be peaked by now. There's no way that Disney thought that they would surpass Netflix in total subs worldwide in less than 3 years. And no one thought that if they did catch Netflix in less than 3 years, that their CEO would be fired 90 days later.
So
that's how quickly the goalposts have changed in this ecosystem in the last couple of years. Yeah.
So I'm confused about one thing.
Just one?
Well, a lot of things, but one for now. When you talk about winners and losers, and you say, here's where things are shifting, and here's where the audience is going, and all that stuff makes sense, except I'm missing, the winners are the winners are Apple?
The winners are going to be, okay, so let's move into this. The winners are going to be the companies. We are moving towards a super app ecosystem, at least in my impression. So let's dig into what the consumers are thinking now. So this is a survey of about 20,000 people that I did recently with Publishers Clearinghouse. And the winners are the ones who can give the consumers enough utility to both pay and watch ads, to stay subscribed and use the service on a regular basis. I think there's this misperception now that consumers don't want to pay and younger consumers don't want to pay either, but they do. Younger consumers are more willing to pay than anybody else. We've raised 3 generations who have been trained to pay for media that they love, right? And when you go into the income element of things, even people who make less than $35,000 a year are willing to pay for the right types of content. On obviously higher income are more willing to pay, but even people who are college students and don't necessarily have expendable income understand that they still have to pay for content. But what we've done is we've really now, after giving the consumer all of the power, when to watch, what to watch, where to watch, how to watch, now they want they want the power over what they will pay. We are moving away from a dichotomy of free or pay to one that is yes and. The consumer, sometimes they want to pay less. Sometimes they want to pay more and have no ads. Sometimes they want to pay nothing and they'll be watching ads. This is 27,000 people we surveyed, by the way. I'm going to vary my preferences depending on what the content is. I'm going to change my mind on the economics on an ongoing basis. We surveyed 27,000 people about all of their subscriptions, right? Music, sports, news, television, everything. And only 7% said that they're going to stay subscribed to the suite of services they have today. 7%. So we've given all of the power to the consumer about where and how to watch things. Now they're basically going to serial churn out of the services that they don't want on a monthly basis.
And in the olden days, in the olden cable days, churn was the worst curse word you could use in a meeting.
Right.
Like that was all they were scared of.
And what happened was when all of these people got into the direct-to-consumer business, they forgot that they had to keep selling to these consumers on a daily basis. They had to keep them around, not just get them in the door, but you have to make them happy every day. So if 93% of your consumers are dissatisfied enough to think about changing on a monthly basis, that's a much more difficult business than we've been in years prior.
I just want to ask the audience a question. How many people have some kind of a system, a notepad or a spreadsheet or something where they track subscriptions and when they end and when you're tired of right? And it's a terrible chore. It's like, because they're always conning you into oh wait, but there's one more episode and it happens to be right after the month.
Well, let me ask you this. Who here has subscribed to something, subscribed to a service, binged a show or a movie, and then canceled that subscription? That is the issue facing the ecosystem. Serial churning is the new channel changing. And if you're not scratching the itch of the consumer on a day-to-day basis, then you're fucked. Those who do will win. This is a survey from Hub asking people what their must-have media is. And what you can see, there's a slight difference above 35 and below 35. But generally speaking, social media, number one, premium streaming, number two, audio in there. Both have MVPDs. Both have cable bundles of some sorts. One's virtual, one's old school. The oldies have reading in their thing. But FAST is increasingly becoming a must-have media platform too. The challenge is if all you do is be a television network.
Explain that acronym, make sure we keep...
FAST is free ad-supported streaming television. Pluto is FAST. Tubi is kind of FAST. Roku channel is FAST. If you're not satisfying many of these things, or if your content isn't traveling across all of these platforms, then you're leaving money behind and you're leaving satisfaction of your consumer behind. But increasingly, this is the kind of bundle that a consumer is making for themselves, and they're gonna be looking for people who can offer more of what they need in what I call the pyramid of feeds, or the Maslow's hierarchy of feeds. Right? So social media is a must-have thing, but the definition of social media is going to change. Yes, people use Facebook, but not everybody. Yes, people use TikTok, but not everybody. There's a lot of social media happening on Roblox and Fortnite right now, with people younger than the age of some of the people in this room, but not always. And they're not just playing games either. So you're going to need to look, the companies that satisfy as many of these as possible, they will win. Increasingly, that is big tech, because they can afford to get into these various areas, whereas the other folks can't. But for publishers or providers or platforms of content, if you're not playing in most of these areas all the time, then I do think you're gonna suffer. You're gonna have a hard time competing in the
But I also think
marketplace.
it's cultural to some extent.
I don't know what that means.
If you go back to the olden days of network television or cable network television, the management teams at those places, I mean, they looked at research, but they also made gut decisions. And they were like, we're going to take it. When you talk about Apple, so Tim Cook is making a business decision about when he's going to release the new, the goggles, their new first generation,
Yes.
That decision is being made in a very complicated way. I mean, it's not, hey, we kind of think it's the right time. It's the economy, it's other things, it's sales.
It's also supply of
supply chain issues.
Supply chain issues too. Also, the fact that people don't really like goggles. But I'm not a big wearable believer. I haven't been. I feel like VR and AR are never going to get where people thought they were going to get, because people don't like putting these fucking things on their faces. But to pretend that these big tech companies are all knowing, all powerful masters of time, space, and dimension defies logic, especially when you look at the last 2 years when Amazon overinvested in commerce infrastructure and Apple had a bad year of iPhone sales. So they're not infallible, but what they have is the ability to lose money experimenting in different sectors until they put other people out of business or take over enough market share where they can control that ecosystem.
So I want to talk about two companies. Talk for a minute about Roku and the screen business. And I mean, we talked about Roku a year ago, and you said some things on the stage that I found surprising. And you were
and all were right.
you were either lucky or smart, but they turned out to be pretty true.
Well, yeah. So let me dive into television really quickly, and I'll show you Roku in a second, I think. So this is the example of what I was telling you before. The triple play disintegrating. Voice and broadband were these gravy products on top of television. And around 25 years ago, television became unprofitable for the cable companies, 30 years ago. But they sold it at basically a break-even price because they were making so much money on voice and broadband. Then both of those peaked, right? The cable bundle started to disintegrate. Who needs landlines anymore, right? And then broadband has actually peaked in the United States. So the customers that are falling the fastest for all of these cable companies are the triple play. But these profits were what allowed them to spend way too much money on content, on movie channels and on sports and all these other things. Now that the triple play is disintegrating, this financial underpinning is falling away. We're disintermediating because of companies like Roku and Samsung Channels and all these other folks. We're disintermediating the traditional cable bundle. What's fascinating is because we bought who here bought televisions for rooms they never thought they'd have televisions? And raise your hand over the last couple of years. So that happened a lot. We bought way more connected televisions than we thought we would, which helped accelerate all these business models. And now the home screen of the home is the connected TV. It's not the phone. We will opt for the biggest, best screen proximate to us. Smart TV is the #1 streaming platform on the face of the earth. Blows away mobile. Because when you're at home, you're watching on a big screen TV. Unless you're watching TikTok, you're watching on a big screen TV. Now, you look at Roku, they're the #1 streaming platform on the face of the earth. The #1 streaming platform on the face of the earth. They're not a top 5 competitor in connected televisions outside the United States. They're #1 on the face of the earth. If I showed you this for the US, they'd be 40% of streaming in the US is Roku, right? Because they were in the sector first. But this is their issue. They have no expansion outside the United States, and it's really basically hampering their ability to grow.
And I don't know that customers are loyal to them. Like, I don't people.
No one's loyal to an operating system of a television set. Except what's interesting is Google, they did a deal with Sony, they did a deal with TCL, and what manufacturers are finding is that when Google or Android is on the side of a box, it helps sell television sets. And Google is now the fastest growing operating system of all televisions on the face of the earth. That duopoly they have in phones, they're trying to recreate in TVs, except their partner in this is Amazon and not Apple. Now, Amazon isn't growing that fast because they retooled faster than Roku did. They retooled from dongles, which are going to die, to their own television sets. What did Roku announce at the beginning of this year? Television set. But they're a one territory, one revenue stream business. And you can see their growth is flattening out compared to Google and some of these others. So this is the competitive landscape for connected televisions on the face of the earth. This is the competitive landscape for streaming on the face of the earth. The other thing that's happened in the last couple of years is the world has gotten appreciably smaller. Content from Spain and South Korea and Italy is now playing gangbusters on streaming in America and circling around the rest of the world. But you can see here that the platforms and the television manufacturers and the streamers are all now really aimed at each other for battle in a way that is not necessarily, it's almost a bit of a race to the bottom to a certain extent.
You're making me feel a little bad for them.
For who?
Well, just for the community. It's like, wow, this is really hard, and it seems like there's going to be like a lot of blood on the conference table.
This is going to be a really difficult ecosystem. What's interesting, though, I think, is the local broadcasters in Europe and around the rest of the world, unlike what's happened here in the US, because they have publicly supported funds, and as a consequence can afford to spend on rights and news in a way that other people can't, and because they actually are aging behind us a little bit with regards to their television ecosystem, I think they're going to be able to miss some of the mistakes that we've made here. And I think that the BBC, who announced that they're going to be purely digital, one app by the end of this decade, I look for those types of firms to actually become even more powerful in this new ecosystem, because as powerful as Amazon and Google will always be, there's no way they can sell a television in the UK without the BBC. You can't. It's impossible. They are the Netflix of that territory. BBC gets used 3 times more than Netflix does.
So we covered something, and I want to just roll back for a sec. So we talked about Apple going after Meta's business, and this is going to be the year that Apple's in the ad business, which I don't fully understand, but we can leave that for another day. You talked now almost 2 years ago. First time I heard it was from you, and it has since appeared in my radar a lot, is this extraordinary growth of Amazon in the ad business.
Yeah, so this is a major trend in all of advertising, and it's going to drive a major trend in the ecosystem because of the way it works, but especially in television, and I'll get into that right here. So we know that streaming is 40%. I'm going to get to your question in a second. We know that streaming is now 40% of all television, right? And when you dig into the numbers, you can see that YouTube is by far and away the biggest platform out here. So as everything moves off of linear television and to connected television, who do you think is going to win this battle? Netflix is a huge bandwidth hog, and Hulu's doing quite well, and as is Amazon Prime. But YouTube is, remember, the fastest growing operating system in connected televisions? Google. The largest share of all video on connected televisions? Google. So they're going to get a piece of all of this. And then this other area where there is 11%, the biggest section, there's this turf war going on inside here for all of the ad dollars that are going to be generated through the streaming world over the next couple of years. I'll get to your question, I promise. Churn, go ahead.
Well, no, I have a way of framing it. So
go ahead.
Finish the slide, then we'll...
So churn is this major issue that I talked about before. It's destroying streaming right now because people weren't necessarily prepared for retaining consumers. Not just acquiring them, which is expensive, but retaining them. And at the same time, the ad economy is in a recession. So ad dollars are at their most precious now. The fight for ad dollars on all platforms is at its height. Right? And at that same moment last year, you had retail, media, and auto pulling money out of the ecosystem. Now, this money is going to come back, but they're not going to be looking for the same old ads that they've been looking for that they looked at before the pandemic. They're not going to come looking for just branding stuff. They're going to look for performance media, especially when it moves to streaming, and the data is substantially more. It should be more robust. Unfortunately, it's not. I'm getting to your answer, I promise. So when you look at these four companies, these are the four horsemen of the streaming apocalypse, right? So these folks are now trying to move their advertising business to the streaming television screen. They're trying to move their ad business out of linear and to CTV and into their premium streaming products. And they need to do it quickly. The most profitable business in any one of these companies is their linear television channel. That's the linear television business is the most profitable here, right? And the thing that's losing the most money is the streaming. So they're trying to rebuild this television business. Meanwhile, in FAST, you're adding 500 channels a year. So there's this cacophony, there's this discovery issue that consumers are having. But connected television ad growth has plateaued. So after years of money moving to connected television, and people not being able to find enough impressions, connected television advertising has actually plateaued this year. And the number one fastest growing sector of the advertising economy is retail media. Retail media. Amazon. Last year, Walmart did $2.2 billion in advertising. $2.2 billion in advertising. Instacart had a really good fourth quarter, not because they sold a lot of products, but because they did well in advertising. And so over this time, Amazon has grown an ad business that's bigger than all of Paramount and all of Disco Brothers.
Let me
$37 billion in advertising last year on Amazon, predominantly because this is a retail media business.
Let me explain what he means by that. Because we've had this conversation. So in this room today, there is somebody that needs a new pair of shoes. There is somebody that needs dishwashing soap. There is somebody that is looking to buy a new toaster. All the advertiser wants to know is who. Just if I could say, do you want a new toaster? Raise your hand. You can raise your hand. That's worth an enormous amount of money. So if you're going to go home and say, I got to buy a new toaster, what are you going to do? You're probably going to go to Amazon and type toaster into Amazon. That's intent. And that's incredibly valuable, and that's what they're selling, which is if you're Nike and someone's searching for sneakers, you want to put your ad right next to that search result.
And increasingly, that is going to be the measurement of the advertising economy.
And by the way, that's terrible for Google, right?
No, actually, for Google, it's actually not bad. So Google had a okay year last year. Their revenue was only up 10%. And most of that was driven by their cloud business. And here's a really good example. They can lose money in advertising. They can lose money in television. They can lose money in gaming and in music because the cloud grew 32% for them last year. Diversified revenue stream, right? But YouTube is great at performance advertising. First of all, everyone got mad at Google last year because YouTube only grew by 1.4%. They did $29.4 billion just on YouTube. And if we don't think this company is going to dominate the connected television business, we're kidding ourselves, absolutely kidding ourselves. And to get to your point, and to the larger point, performance media, money spent, dollars back, return on ad spend, ROAS. Holiday, we were talking about this just yesterday. That is the new metric. Holiday runs an agency called Algebra that works with influencers to sell products. They don't buy on the number of impressions, do they? They buy on...
less so lately.
They buy on products sold. Return on ad spend. 70% of $29 billion, 70% of YouTube's ad business is machine learning, AI-driven performance marketing. I spend $1, I make $1.27. I spend $100, I make $127. That's how this works. They are going to bring this to their operating systems and YouTube on connected television. They already own 70% of the world's phones. And they're going to connect all of this. And when somebody takes an ad with them, they're going to be able to tell you how much money that customer made in return. And these motherfuckers want to try to bring impressions-based ad selling to connected television as if it's 1957 again. This thing of half my marketing money is being wasted, I just don't know which half. You ever hear that? Raise your hand if you've heard that phrase before. It's from 1956. John Wanamaker. This group put together the Joint Industry Council to come up with a measurement metric to replace Netflix, Nielsen. We don't care how many impressions are generated. We care how many rakes we sold. We care how many cans of Coke we sold. Do we think these folks moving in the number of impressions over to connected television are going to be able to compete with machine learning, AI-driven performance marketing, return on ad spend? No. These folks are going to have to change their business model. Netflix doing pre-roll, one second. Netflix doing pre-roll is adorable. It's like 1999 again. This is where we're headed. This is where we're headed. Where with my voice remote, I can buy those sunglasses, and then it's going to appear on my phone a couple seconds later. And I won't interrupt my viewing experience, but it'll show up on my phone. It won't, and then I can get rid of it with the press of my remote control. This type of performance marketing, my friends at iBuy designed that for us. This type of overlay is where we're headed.
I want to make sure that we have time for questions, so
yeah.
If you're going to get ready to ask questions, you can start to line up. We've got about 15 minutes left. I got to, though, just dig into, of the things that failed last year, you know, the one thing we're not talking about at all is IoT voice. I mean, is Alexa just done? By the way, every time I say that name, I wince like this. So, what can I do for you, Steve?
I think it's not
selling anything, right, for Amazon?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if IoT voice is... I never installed one of those because it's listening to me at all times. So I don't have a smart speaker in my house. Although I have a Siri on my phone and I know she's listening to me right now. So I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I think that all of the AI, ChatGPT, all of these things are great ways to add to the IP. I don't see them being standalone businesses unto themselves necessarily.
All right, so questions from the audience. Evan has delivered a lot of from on high facts. We have smart people here, we're at South by. Does anyone want to push back on any of his assumptions, or does everyone just think that they're going to assume that he's correct and everything is perfect? There you go. Oh, come on.
This one? Or
No,
this
whatever you want. That's good.
First of all, this was the best session in 3 days. Thank you so much. I work for distribution companies selling content to all of those. Do you have any insight on where to focus on? I have fast channels. I sell it all. But where should I, as the content provider, focus on?
So you're a studio or, yeah. So there's two different things. I think I'm going to go through a couple slides here. I think when you look at this map and you want to be an arms dealer, you have to think about who needs the most arms. And so I do think you're going to see Samsung and LG and some of these other folks, and then the Plutos and the Tubies. They're not going to pay top dollar, though, because remember, they went from an ecosystem that had two different revenue sources, subscription and video and advertising, to one that has only one. So I would look at the companies who have the greatest need for impressions within their own ecosystem. So Roku, Tubi, Pluto, those, Samsung, LG, those would be the ones I would look at.
Amazon Prime?
Freevee. The big streaming services are all going to move to big mass things, sports. And honestly, if I was going to be in the content business for the next couple of years, I would do anything I could to get into the sports and news business, because there's going to be $1 trillion in advertising pushed through for the next election. We've got the Olympics coming up in Paris. Live utility day-to-day product is going to be the stuff that's going to be bought most. So if the format shows that can repeat daily, from a genre standpoint, I would err into those. As far as buyers go, though, don't sleep on the creator economy and building your own audience. So if you have a library or if you make content, I think that 50% of the economics out of content over the next 10 to 25 years is going to become direct to consumer, brands selling direct to the consumers themselves, building their own audience, building their own community. Something I skipped over here is subscription podcasting. Subscription podcasting, is now one of the hottest sectors out there. Consumers can sell their own, makers can sell their own podcasts to their own consumer base. So don't sleep on building your own channels on audio, on FAST, on YouTube, and interacting with consumers directly, because I do think, especially for things that aren't Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and big, huge shows like that, it's going to be a couple years until the economy comes back in full swing. I hope that answers your
If only
question.
Evan had a Substack you could subscribe to.
Yeah, I didn't cover nearly anything that I wanted to cover today.
Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Richard. I'm a journalist. How fucked am I?
So if you're going to work for the big gatekeepers, you're pretty fucked, right? If you're going to sit around waiting for a green light from a big company to pay for your stuff, then I would say you're too reliant on a group of people who don't have any fucking idea where they're headed. Like, I put up the New York Times there. They're the only one I know that feels that they have a handle on things. But I would really encourage you to start your own newsletter and find your own audience. Reaching 1 million people a day through a major publication is really cool. But we also found that it's not necessarily the most secure job in the whole world. Having 5,000 people who read you every week and pay you for that, that is the safety net of the creator right now. But also, over the course of an individual creator, producer, writer, animator, whatever, 50% of their living from now on will very likely come from the creator economy and not the gatekeeper economy. One, because the gatekeeper economy is fucked up and you can't rely on it. Two, consumers like paying artists directly for their work. They really, really do. My Substack is not huge, but people who like it really like it, and they are very adamant about it. Building a good cult is a very profitable business.
Thank you so much.
Why do I think that's the tweet that's going to come out of this? Evan says,
Donald Trump proved it himself.
Thanks, guys. I am a subscriber to your Substack. I don't plan on churning this year, so
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
What are the rundles in the research that you're doing? What are the rundles that you think consumers want when you think about how to package all this stuff? And what's the shit that you think we're actually going to get?
I think if you look at the bundle scorecard here, Amazon. Who here has Amazon Prime? Who here plans on canceling it soon? Right. You are? Oh, good for you. Jeff Bezos has already called you. So it's the people who can supply as many of the Maslow's hierarchy of feeds as a consumer needs are going to be the ones that don't churn. So Prime is the best Rundle of all time. Apple with Apple One. So soon you'll be able to subscribe. You'll get news, you'll get gaming, but you'll get music. You'll also get that phone for free. And it'll all come for a year. Microsoft, I think, is building one. I think the New York Times has a really interesting, even in their earnings, they called it a lifestyle bundle of services. So I also think Walmart and Paramount Plus is an interesting pairing. I think DoorDash and Roku is an interesting pairing. Look for a lot of that. And then watch, I think it's only a matter of time till Spotify gets bought by somebody. I think it's only a matter of time till Netflix gets bought by Microsoft. So I do think you're going to see a lot more bundling between services coming up.
Thanks, man.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So my name's Essie. I lead social ads for Neutrogena.
Oh, cool.
And my question is, although this was primarily focused on TV, with TikTok becoming the top search engine for Gen Z, do you have any sort of opinion on how that will impact TV as well as Google, because they're taking share from Google?
Yeah, I mean, first of all,
I do as well.
TikTok had a down quarter in fourth quarter, so they were down 8% year on year, whereas Amazon was up. You also see that right after TikTok announced that they were down 8% in the quarter, they really started to press up their shopping. So you're going to see them move into retail in a big, big way. I think TikTok is going to face a lot of headwinds from their own owners, the Chinese government, and also from American, European, and Australian regulators. So I think they're going to have some issues on a moving forward basis. I do think that of all of the companies on this map, Google would be the one I think is going to bounce back in a big way using all these multifaceted inputs. So they're not just selling you video on YouTube, but they're selling you ads across their television platform and across their app store, and et cetera. I think Apple is going to increasingly get into the ad business with their app store. But I think TikTok, I think their influence, I'm not saying it's peaked, but I do think you will see them, I think you're going to see them use their powerful engine to get into the retail business in a big way this year. But I think in 2 or 3 years, we're going to be talking about what happened to TikTok.
And I disagree.
Oh, okay.
I think TikTok as a behavior is different than TikTok as a company.
Correct.
And I'll just, what I would challenge all of you is, if you're not using TikTok as a search engine, try it. So, for example, all these people were talking about restaurants in New York, and there's all this restaurant, and I couldn't understand it. So I finally went in and said, new restaurants in my neighborhood on blah, blah, blah. And holy cow, the videos were amazing. And the tours were great, and it looked delicious. And like, there was no way the New York Times restaurant
You can go Google how to put together a P&L. There'll be on-screen examples on TikTok. It's a very powerful platform. It's also a spyware platform, and I think
I'm not defending it. I'm defending the use case, the form factor.
Yeah. I think you're right at that.
So we ought to find the next TikTok. Let's all. Who's got someone?
Well, that's the thing is, I think there will be a next TikTok. I really do, and I think it'll look a lot more like these Web 2.5 platforms. It'll mix video and gaming a lot more than
and it
TikTok.
won't be Reels.
No.
Okay, next.
Quick one, just from the other side of the pond. I'm a North American living 30 years in Europe, and where most of the countries don't have fast channels yet. The languages, the countries are small, the language barrier. It's not your core right now, but do you have any views on kind of the other half of where it's not North America?
No, actually, absolutely. I'm actually about to go to MIP and to the EBU in Warsaw, and so I'm going to spend a lot of time with them. I do think you're going to see them all get into the fast business.
Yeah, it started in the UK,
And what I
France.
was saying earlier was the big broadcasters, the big publishers in these territories haven't had to suffer through the same bullshit
Yes.
that's happened here because they have the public support in many cases, or they have just different sets of economics. So I do think they're going to get to evade a lot of the bigger mistakes because they can use us as a case study on what to avoid. And I do think Europe is a great place for a free ad-supported service to expand. So I think you're going to see a lot more of the native content move to these free streaming platforms, especially as Samsung, Roku's trying to infiltrate Europe, but especially as Samsung and Google really infiltrate Europe and LG infiltrate Europe with their smart television sets, and the consumer base moves from linear to streaming. I do think you're going to see a better version of it, more organically grow in
And
Europe.
perhaps more localized. I mean, a lot of
Very
the bigger,
much more
the bigger
localized.
platforms now are realizing they shouldn't roll out in 43 countries the same content.
I think if there's
but localized.
if there's one thing I would say that this next 18 months is really going to be focused on, both in audio and in video, is local. Local. A lot of money is moving there.
Yeah.
Consumers really like stuff in their own language, from their own neighborhood, with their own weather and their own teams, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So look for local to be a major, major push across the globe.
Last question.
You mentioned the two revenue streams for all of these companies, advertising and
Say that one more
subscription.
time.
You mentioned the two revenue streams for all of these companies, advertising and subscription. I'd argue that TikTok has a third revenue stream or value proposition, which is, like you said, spyware or propaganda, whatnot.
It does. It's going quite well.
So is there a third revenue stream or value proposition that you see developing for the media ecosystem overall?
Commerce. I don't see, ultimately media has always been commerce. As much as we like to kid ourselves that we're doing it for art, for the most of the media's life cycle, it's been to sell shit, right? And we had someone, whether it's the King's word or Coca-Cola, media is carrying a message on behalf of some benefactor. And I do think there'll be this premium ad-free ecosystem for people who want to hyper-pay for content to avoid ads. But 80% of the content will carry ads, whether it's also coming with a fee. Like who has Hulu here? Well, everybody who here has Hulu with ads. So you're paying for it and you're getting ads, just like cable, right?
Yeah, but that's criminally evil. Sorry.
But so ultimately, there is the most measurement of how many people watched a television show or an ad is going to matter substantially less over the next 25 years than it has over the past. All that we're going to care about, or 80% of what we're going to care about, is, did it sell product? So those folks who can actually move product on their platforms the way that YouTube does right now, the way that Meta does right now. TikTok, I think, is going to move big into shopping this year. So I think and I think ultimately you're going to see all of these platforms move into some very shoppable, very commercial enterprise, as opposed to just breaking up the content with ads.
Ladies and gentlemen, Evan Shapiro.